In the previous part, Kane and Lena shared their sweetest, most unforgettable moment on a yacht in the middle of the Savannah River. But happiness barely had time to settle before a grenade exploded inside his own penthouse, and Kane threw himself over Lena to shield her from the blast, his head taking the full force of the shockwave. 15 days in a coma, and when he finally woke, the resonance seal, the 3-generation power, had gone silent in his hand. Will Kane's awakening lead them to a happy ending? Two weeks after waking up, Kane was talking again and moving around the penthouse on his own. The cuts across his back from the shattered glass had healed quickly, leaving only a few thin scars still fading into his skin. The head injury had progressed better than Dr. Harmon predicted. No delayed complications, no lasting neurological damage. He still got mild headaches in the afternoons, sometimes dizziness when he stood up too fast, but that was normal for someone who had spent 15 days in a coma. Tuesday morning, the sofa beside the window. Lena sat next to him with a cup of tea in her hands. Savannah sunlight spilled warmly across the room, the same sunlight Kane had seen thousands of times from this penthouse, yet somehow it had never looked this beautiful before. "Tell me honestly," she said softly, "how do you feel?" Kane looked out the window. He thought for a moment not about what answer to give but about what the real answer actually was. "It still hurts," he admitted. "But mentally, I feel lighter than I ever have." Lena didn't ask why. She simply rested her hand over his, gave it a small squeeze and took another sip of tea. Lighter than ever. He meant it. 10 years holding the resonance seal. 10 years of headaches after every activation. 10 years of watching his hearing test numbers slowly decline for 10 years. 10 years haunted by the image of his grandfather sitting silently in a chair, and his father lying in a hospital bed for a week before dying. 10 years carrying something he never chose, yet could never refuse. And now that thing sat silent in his palm, not because he had chosen to let it go. It had simply shut down on its own. And strangely enough, the feeling wasn't lost. It was relief. Sunday afternoon, Rosa and Sarah came to the penthouse. Lena noticed immediately from the way Sarah walked in. Arms full of thick folders, expression more serious than a simple hospital visit. Rosa brought a pot of soup, but instead of laying dishes out in the kitchen, she carried it straight into the living room. Lena stood. "You three should talk." "I'll wait outside." She stepped onto the balcony. The balcony and living room had already been completely repaired after the explosion. Bulletproof glass had replaced the old windows. But in the hallway wall, there was still a small dent where Kane's head had slammed into the concrete. A mark the painter still hadn't fully covered. The glass door closed behind her. The three Moros sat around the coffee table. Sarah spoke first, direct as always. "You've tried activating it multiple times since waking up. None of it worked." Kane nodded. Sarah placed the documents on the table. Aged paper, faded ink, old handwritten Italian, with red ink translations scrawled beside the text. "An old ritual," she said quietly, "from our great-grandfather's era, before Cesare." She looked straight at Kane. "It can restore the ability completely." A pause. "But the cost doubles. The hearing deterioration after reactivation accelerates twice as fast." "No." One word. Clear. Immediate. "No hesitación." Sarah studied him. "You're sure?" Kane stayed silent for a moment, not because he was uncertain, but because he was choosing how to say what he had been thinking through during the past 2 weeks, staring at the penthouse ceiling. "Am I sad?" he said at last. "Yeah. It was the greatest advantage this family ever had." He paused. "But for 10 years I lived terrified of ending up like grandfather, silent in a chair, unable to hear anyone anymore. Or like father, lying in a hospital bed before dying." His gaze lowered briefly. "That fear shaped the way I lived. I never let myself get too attached. Never let myself think too far into the future." He looked at Rosa. "You watched Dad walk down that road. I don't want you to watch it happen again." Rosa grabbed her son's hand tightly. Her fingers trembled. "Father always said prosperity comes from collective strength." Kane exhaled softly. "For 10 years I nodded along, but every time things got difficult, I still relied on the resonance seal." He looked down at his palm. Now it's gone, and I feel lighter. Not because I lost something, but because it's no longer crushing my shoulders. Then he turned to Sarah. The Vega battle. Your plan was perfect. 25 out of 26. His voice stayed calm. Not because I heard anything. Because you calculated every move correctly. Sarah's eyes reddened slightly at the corners, though her voice remained steady. Our family will be fine, Kane. She rested a hand over the documents. This goes back into the vault. We don't use it. We don't use it. Rosa started crying then, not from sadness but from relief. A few tears slid down the lines of her face. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, inhaled deeply and stood up. Good, she said firmly. Then the decision's made. Eat the soup already. I've been cooking since morning and now it's gone cold.
Sarah looked softly.
Kane genuinely smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. Rosa headed toward the kitchen. Sarah gathered the documents together. Before following their mother, she glanced at Kane. Lena's still outside on the balcony. Go bring her in. Kane walked to the glass door. Lena stood outside with both hands resting on the railing, looking out over the river glowing gold-orange beneath the sunset. She turned when she heard the door open. Everything okay? Everything's okay. She didn't ask anything else. She simply walked back inside. Kane looked toward the coffee table. 4 bowls of soup were already laid out. 4. Not 3. His mother had already counted Lena as family long before anyone said it out loud. Savannah looked completely different in spring. The oak trees throughout the historic district had burst into fresh green leaves. Spanish moss swayed lazily in the warm breeze. Morning sunlight carried a softer kind of gold that winter never could. Kane stood beside the arched window with a cup of coffee in his hand. 1 year. 1 year since the night he threw himself over Lena to shield her from the grenade, smashed his head against concrete, and lost the resonance seal forever. He had expected it to be much harder. The first thing he noticed was how light his mind felt. Not metaphorically, literally. For 10 years, the background headaches had become so constant that he stopped realizing they existed. Like a faint ringing in the ears that eventually starts to feel like silence. And now, for the first time in years, there was actual silence. He slept more deeply, woke without dizziness. Dr. Harmon checked his hearing every 3 months. The 32% damage in his right ear had stabilized. For the first time in his life, the numbers weren't worse than before. The second thing, he listened differently now. Not supernaturally, normally, through damaged human ears. But 10 years of using the resonance seal had taught him how to filter sound, how to isolate one voice in a crowded room, how to read breathing patterns and changes in tone. Those skills hadn't disappeared when the supernatural power did. They stayed behind in the way he read people, read rooms, listened to what wasn't being said. Slower, more human, more real. And Lena had taught him something else. Intentional listening. Choosing one thing to hear instead of trying to hear everything at once. She taught it through music, but it applied to everything: negotiations, meetings, judging people. Listen less. Understand more. Not everything became easier. Some nights, he still startled awake at 2 in the morning, reaching instinctively toward the nightstand for the resonance seal, before remembering it was gone. Like losing a limb. You know it's no longer there, but your nerves still send signals anyway. On those nights, he would lie still beside Lena, listening to her steady breathing, reminding himself, still breathing, still hearing, with his own ears. Fighting became harder too. Without the seal, the family lost its greatest intelligence advantage. Kane could no longer hear enemies plotting 5 kilometers away, couldn't detect ambushes before they happened, couldn't scan an entire battlefield in 15 seconds. The Moro family had to operate traditionally now, human intelligence networks analysis. Slower, harder. There were nights Sarah stayed awake 3 days straight planning operations that Kane once could have handled with a single scan. But, and this was the part he never expected, the victories felt more complete now. Before, every victory earned through the resonance seal carried bitterness with it. He always knew the cost. Knew another piece of his hearing had been sacrificed. Winning felt like paying a debt. Now, a victory was simply a victory. Clean. Earned together.
Sera planned.
Nico commanded. 16 men carried it out. No borrowing power. No paying with flesh. The prosperity of the family comes from collective strength. His father had been right. 10 years later, Kane finally understood that sentence with his entire life. The outside world changed too. Salvatore Vega, the 70-year-old boss of Jacksonville, didn't die that night. But what he lost was worse. 25 out of 26 men were wiped out in a single evening. News spread through the East Coast underworld within 48 hours. Vega had already lost both sons in previous defeats. Now he had lost nearly his entire force. One by one, his allies pulled away.
No formal betrayals. No declarations.
They simply stopped answering his calls. Within 6 months, the Vega family had fallen from the strongest power in Jacksonville to a name people spoke with pity. An old man is sitting alone in an empty mansion. Kane didn't need to do anything else. The underworld handled losers on its own, with silence and forgetting. Sarah delivered the news one ordinary morning, casually like discussing the weather. Kane nodded once and never thought about Salvatore Vega again. As for Marco Fani, Lena never asked, and Clara never mentioned him again. And Lena understood. After the night Nico punched him to the ground on the front porch, Marco never once tried getting close to his stepdaughter again. It wasn't reconciliation, just distance. And sometimes distance is the closest thing people ever get to peace. Kane set his coffee down and walked back into the living room. Lena sat on the sofa with one hand resting on her stomach, round and full now, 8 months pregnant beneath a cream-colored sweater. She was reading a book about music therapy theory and glanced up when she heard him approach. "Now that you're done with coffee," she said, smiling faintly, "come sit with your 2 favorite people." Kane sat beside her. He rested a hand gently against her stomach. Something moved inside. "He's kicking," Lena whispered with a smile. "I know." On the coffee table beside a glass of water and several sheets of music sat the resonance seal. Not because Kane used it anymore, but because it had become a family keepsake, kept nearby the same way people keep old photographs. He reached for the water glass. His elbow accidentally bumped the tuning fork. It rolled lightly against the stack of sheet music with a soft metallic tap. At the same moment, Lena jolted. "Oh!" Kane looked over immediately. "What?" He kicked. "Hard." She blinked in surprise. "Much harder than usual." Kane stared at the tuning fork, then at Lena's stomach, then back at the tuning fork again. He picked it up and tapped it lightly against his palm. He expected nothing. For the past year, every attempt had returned nothing but cold metal and silence. This time was no different. Silence. But Lena startled again. "Kane," he kicked again. "Right when you tapped it." The two of them stared at each other. "Do it again." He tapped it. Lena grabbed his hand and pressed it against her stomach. A strong, deliberate kick. Again. Top. Kick. Top. Kick. 4 times. All 4. The baby reacted perfectly in rhythm, as though hearing something Kane himself no longer could. Lena slowly sat upright, one hand still resting over her stomach, eyes fixed on the resonance seal. "When you tap it, I can't hear anything," she whispered. "But the baby can. Those aren't random kicks. He's responding to the rhythm." Silence filled the room as golden Savannah sunlight poured through the arched windows. "Kane," she said softly, "our child can hear it." Kane didn't answer immediately. He sat there with the tuning fork in one hand and the other resting against her stomach, feeling each tiny movement beneath his palm, thinking about Cesare, Aldo, 3 generations and the paths each of them walked. The resonance seal would pass on to this child, not as a curse, as a legacy. And this time, the child would have a mother capable of hearing the frequencies the Moro family had missed for over a century, and a father who had already walked through the darkest part of that road and returned to teach his child where the cliffs were, and where the light remained. That evening, while Kane sat working in his office, Lena answered a phone call in the living room. Her mother. Clara's voice sounded different this time. Not rushed. Not cold. No loud music playing in the background. She was calling from home alone. Marco was away performing somewhere. She asked if Lena was healthy, how many weeks pregnant she was, whether the morning sickness had been bad. Questions she had almost never asked in 13 years. Then Clara spoke slowly. like someone trying to open a door she herself had kept shut for far too long. "I want to come see you," she said quietly. "If you'll let me. I want to take care of you during your pregnancy." Lena stayed silent for several seconds, moved but not crying. 13 years had taught her to save tears for moments that truly required them. "Come visit." "Lena," Clara inhaled softly on the other end of the line. "You've always been a good daughter. All those years chasing music and performing, I always felt guilty for not being fully there for you. But I kept letting the years pass anyway." Her voice steadied. "It may be late, but from now on I want to spend more time with you." Lena sat quietly with the phone in her hand. After 13 years, this was the closest Clara had ever come to admitting she needed to change. It wasn't exactly an apology, but for Clara this already meant a great deal. And Lena, who had long ago learned how to love her mother without demanding she become someone different, understood that this step, even late, was real. "Come," Lena said softly. "I'll make porridge for you." Clara laughed quietly on the other end of the call, a sound Lena hadn't heard in a very long time. "Ask Marco how he's doing too." Clara fell silent for a beat. "Maybe our lives are too difficult to change," she said at last. "Our careers and our lives have always belonged to the stage, until our legs finally grow too tired to keep going." She repeated the same sentence she once used years ago, but this time it sounded softer, sadder. "But making time for you, that's the part one chooses to change. And I will." After the call ended, Lena sat there quietly. Kane didn't ask questions. He simply stepped into the living room, covered her hand with his, and squeezed gently. "My mom wants to visit." "That's good. Maybe not entirely good," she said with a tired smile. "But at least she's trying. Trying is enough." That night Lena sat at the keyboard and played Nocturne No. 20, her father's favorite piece. But she played it more softly than usual. Not because she was sad, because for the first time in 13 years, she was no longer playing it completely alone. Late that night, Kane sat alone in the office at the end of the hallway. Lena had gone to sleep around 10. The final month of pregnancy drained her energy quickly. Before coming here, he had tucked another blanket around her. An old habit remained, sitting alone beneath a single lamp late at night. But the feeling was completely different now. Before, there had always been headaches and a glass of whiskey. Now there was ginger tea Lena had prepared for him earlier. The resonance seal rested on the desk before him. 3 names are engraved into its history. Cesare. Aldo. Kane. He picked it up. Didn't strike it. Just held it. Grandfather Cesare lost his hearing slowly, like light gradually fading from a room. First, the quiet sounds disappeared. Falling leaves, soft rain. Then the ordinary sounds, the radio, passing cars. And finally, the human voice. Human voices were always the last thing to vanish and the most painful to lose. Because when those disappear, people lose the connection itself. They lose the thing that reminds them they still belong somewhere. His father, Aldo, walked the same road more slowly. He lost the sound of rain first, then the wind, and then began tilting his ear toward people every time they spoke. Every conversation became an effort instead of an instinct. And eventually he died, not from deafness, but because the final headache never stopped. Kane carried 32% damage inside him. Not deaf, not unable to hear voices, but there were small empty spaces now. Rain against the roof sounded quieter than before. Sometimes he couldn't hear leaves falling at all. 32%. Enough to understand that every ordinary sound people ignored was something precious that shouldn't be wasted. The sound of Lena playing piano in the mornings. He heard it clearly, and felt grateful every time he still could. Her laughter, bright, short, echoing through the penthouse before fading away. He noticed every single time like someone noticing sunrise. The way she said his name, Kane. 2 syllables resting perfectly within the range his ears could still hear completely clearly, without losing a single note. And when he rested his hand against Lena's stomach earlier that afternoon and felt their child kick in rhythm with the resonance seal, he finally understood. This story didn't end with him. It continued. But the next generation would have something the previous 3 never did. A mother capable of hearing the layers of sound the Moro family missed for over a century. and a father who had already paid enough to understand exactly where the line should never be crossed. Kane set the resonance seal back down, turned off the light, walked back to the bedroom. Lena lay curled on her side, hair spread across the pillow, one hand resting over her round stomach, breathing softly in her sleep. He sat at the edge of the bed, looked at her, listened to her breathing. The most beautiful echoes never needed to be amplified 1,000 times. They only needed a pair of ears calm enough to truly listen. He lay down beside her, rested his hand gently over her stomach, warm, soft, and felt something very small move beneath his palm. He didn't need the resonance seal to hear that. He only needed to be here and listen. Outside the arched windows, Savannah drifted through the night. Ancient oak trees draped in silver Spanish moss, the river flowing quietly as it had for 300 years. And in the penthouse high above the city, a man lay beside the woman carrying a child who could already hear the frequencies her father no longer could. A child for whom 3 generations of the Morrow family had sacrificed hearing, pain, and even their lives trying to fully understand. The story of the resonance seal wasn't over. It had only just entered a new chapter.